Hi, sales friends. I got the old glasses on today so I can see, but I want to tell you about one of my clients, Bri Wilson, and what recently happened to her on a sales appointment. I don't know if you've ever had this happen to you before. It certainly has never happened to me in my 40 years of selling. But she showed up to a meeting and the current vendor was sitting there. Yeah, talk about trying to get intimidating. The buyer had mentioned casually that he was going to do an insurance review with Bree, and the current vendor showed up. How would you handle a situation like that? Hi, I'm Christine Harrington, the Savvy Sales Lady, your personal YouTube sales coach. And right after this, I'm going to tell you the rest of Bri's story and how it turned out. So imagine walking into a meeting and being blindsided by the current vendor sitting there. And that's what happened to Bri Wilson. I've got to give Bri a lot of credit because she kept her head and she wasn't intimidated. She simply laid out the facts to the buyer, showed him where he was underinsured, where he was overinsured, and where he was improperly insured. You see, the current vendor hadn't done a renewal review in years. Bri simply emphasized how important it was to do an annual review. Well, the rest of the story is, even though the vendor kept interrupting her, disputing her, Bri remained professional and she kept her cool and she won the deal. Here's the question. How do you persuade change in the buyer? When the buyer's had a long-term relationship with his vendor, how do you get them to embrace change? How often have you heard that the buyer's just not happy with his current vendor, but it just seems too difficult to make the change to you? Or maybe the business relationship has turned into a personal friendship and the buyer is afraid to disrupt that personal relationship. Or maybe he thinks it will. You see, these examples are not objections. These are relationship issues. So you have to be careful how you proceed, because the buyer will perceive it as you're trying to break up that relationship, when in fact all you're trying to do is paint him a newer, better, and brighter picture of what his business will be like by switching to you. So, step one, paint a new picture for the buyer. Now imagine you've had a long business relationship with a current vendor and it's developed into a personal relationship. He's been over to your house for a barbecue. He's been to your girl's graduation. Maybe he went to a wedding of one of your children. You play golf almost every weekend. And yet you've outgrown his product and services. He reassures you that they're coming out with new and better implementation plans. So you just hang in there with him for the sake of the personal relationship now. How would you feel? Caught in the middle? So as the new vendor who has everything that will help solve the buyer's issues and problems, how do you proceed carefully to help the buyer buy from you? Remember Bri? Well, chances are, had she not come along, the buyer would have stayed with his current insurance agent. And when he had a claim, chances are he was improperly insured, which, that's not a good thing. So step two, give the buyer the words and the courage to end the current relationship. Oftentimes people just need permission to do what's best for their business. Now you may think, well, that's a pretty no-brainer. I do too. But deep business relationships that turn into personal friendship are often the hardest to change, even when the product and service is no longer a good fit for the business. Often the buyer doesn't want to hurt the personal relationship, so they just stay with the current vendor. Step three, help him to imagine how much easier and better his business will run when he moves to your product and services. As I said in step one, give him the words he needs when discussing this change with his current vendor. Step 4. Next, explain how to implement the change in vendors. Describe your back room. Describe your implementation plan. Describe how you're going to be there every step of the way to make the transition easy, simple, and seamless. People just want to know it's not going to disrupt their office and their way of doing business. Keep in mind, you're going to get some resistance because this is a really hard decision. He's wrestling in his mind how he's going to tell the current vendor and how will it affect his relationship with him. Personal story. I had a buyer tell me one time that although he knew that my product and services were actually better for his business than his current vendor, he felt like if he ended that relationship with the current vendor, that there goes the personal relationship. All I said was, if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying if you end the business relationship, then you'll no longer have a personal relationship with this vendor. Am I understanding this correctly? He smiled and said, "Good point, Christine." All I did was reframe what he told me and shine the light on the obvious. You may think that that was aggressive on my part, but it really was a simple way to show the buyer the truth. Just like ending a marriage and divorce takes a long, hard decision, so does ending long-term business relationships too. It takes patience on your part and the ability to paint a new and brighter beginning for the buyer. So tell me, have you ever been blindsided like Bri? I'd love to hear your story. Will you put it in the comment section below? You know, I appreciate all of you, and I do these videos to help you accelerate the learning curve in sales. So remember this, sales is a journey. It's not a quick trip around the block. See you on the next video.
There's a voice inside the silence, hear it whispering